Pocket watch business. What about before that? He worked at a train station. He worked for the railroads. All right, what we're covering today is the mining and the railroad operation. Okay, that's our first little section. Second is going to be Native Americans, because obviously with the railroad moving west, there are already people who live there, right? And so this railroad and the settlers that live there are going to have a huge effect on Native Americans, the population that's already there. Your question, section focus question today. How was life in the West affected by migration of settlers? Graphic organizer. Key vocabulary. We have a number of terms today. Most of our vocabulary terms today deal with the second half of the notes in terms of the Native Americans and the resistance that they have to this migration west of white Americans, and now we're even having black Americans move west. We saw in the video that 1 out of every 3 cowboys was either former slave or African American. That's Geronimo. You have to remember that at the end of the Civil War in 1865, most Americans, and by Americans I mean people who live within the United States, okay, believe that these western territories, the territories in between the East Coast and California, are mostly unsettled. In reality, who's there?
Native Americans.
Native Americans. Who else? And most cattle drivers, cowboys if you will, learn their trade from who?
Mexicans.
Mexicans. Okay? Most of these lasso skills that they have are taught to them by Mexican settlers from Texas, Mexican settlers that push north to Oklahoma. Okay? So the West is, there are already settlers out west before this great American migration west. Okay? There are Native Americans and also settlers from Mexico. Right? So in essence, the West already has a population of people. And yet, there's the idea within the United States that the West is unsettled. It's this wild territory that America is going to conquer. The wild, wild west.
They have a lot of cowboys.
Westerns become, and that's actually an excellent point, is that this great migration west provides kind of the American idea of the rugged individual that comes back into play. We talked about that originally when we had James Fenimore Cooper and his books about Natty Bumppo, that rugged individual character who was challenging the frontier. Right? Well, the Western is the new version of that. The new version of the cowboy, this singular, rugged individual challenging the unknown, unsettled, unconquered areas of the West.
Isn't that one thing about Billy the Kid? Is it a myth that they had for the Western times, or is it like?
They're based on, some of these legends and myths are based on historical figures. I have no idea. But I can find out. So can you. It's called research. In 1849, the gold rush brings thousands to California. Okay? And gold and silver mining continues to be the major industry of the West. Okay? When the gold has been exhausted in California, when they're not finding it anymore, you now have people who start moving back eastward into Nevada, into Utah, into Colorado, looking for more gold and silver. And a reminder, these are the trails that these miners and other settlers are taking. All right, most famously the Oregon Trail, as you can see it starts here in Independence and runs this way up through and into Oregon. All right? These are the routes that settlers are taking as they move west. Okay? When, at one point, most people believe that the gold and silver supplies in the west have been exhausted, they hit the Comstock lode. A lode is a rich vein of ore, okay, of silver ore or gold ore, all right, from which you can mine gold and silver, okay, plain and simple. All right? It's in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And the land is owned by this man named Henry Comstock, and so it becomes known as the Comstock Lode. All right? A huge amount of gold and silver is found in these Sierra Nevada mountains. Okay? What's California's nickname as a state?
Golden State.
The Golden State. What's Nevada's nickname? California's the Golden State. Nevada's the Silver State. Okay? Because you find these enormous amounts of silver in Nevada because these mining operations continue. What happens? Who moves? To Nevada. Okay? We have another migration. All right? People flood to this area to look for gold and silver. Okay? Here's Henry Comstock. I'm thinking about trying that. Pull it out. You think I can pull it up? Huh? Yeah. This is in. This is hip. OMG. After you have these miners moving out from California, you have more and more strikes across the west. Okay, you have miners moving into Nevada, you have miners moving up into Oregon, you have miners pushing even out to North and South Dakota, back into the middle of the country, looking for these lodes. Okay? But who's really making the money here?
General stores?
General stores, but also large companies. Because most of these prospectors are selling the rights of their land to larger companies. What can larger companies provide that these little prospectors can't?
Manufacturing. Farming equipment?
Not farming, but just equipment. Mining equipment. Dynamite. The larger companies can buy mass amounts of shovels, mass amounts of pickaxes, mass amounts of little sifters that they use in the rivers. Okay? Once you've exhausted all the gold and silver on the top, once you're done just picking up out of the ground, you got to dig for it. You got to blast for it. All right? So larger companies can do that. In the 1880s, mining is a big business operation. It's no longer just people coming out and mining on different pieces of land. Now it's a huge business. And as Brandon said, springing up around these mining operations are towns. Because these general store owners, these suppliers, are the ones who are really going to make the money. Because they've got the shovels, they've got the equipment that the large companies have purchased for them, and they're the ones selling it. All right? Also, miners need entertainment. Miners need, what else? What else would you do in a daily life? They need hotels. They need places to stay. They need places to eat, restaurants, saloons. Okay? Those are the people who are going to make the monies off of these operations. Okay? And these merchants are literally going to follow the miners around wherever they go and sell them the goods that they need. And where are they going to get these goods from? Factories back east. And And how do they get west?
Transportation.
The transportation, the railroads. It's all interconnected. Less. Yes.
It's around the time when casinos were made.
Roughly. We're getting close to Las Vegas, if that's what you're curious about. Yes.
Is it more money to follow the people with like the little saloons and stuff, or like or would it balance it out? How much money they would make?
Depends on the town. What ends up happening is you have these miners and merchants who become extremely wealthy. Sorry, these merchants who become extremely wealthy off the miners. All right, and then what happens to a specific spot, a specific lode? Well, they exhaust all the gold and silver. They're not finding any anymore. So the miners move. Now, if you own a saloon in that town, you have two choices. You stay and hope they find another load of gold and silver, and if they do, you're okay. Or you move. You follow the miners to make sure that they're the ones who are spending the money in your saloon or on your business.
Yeah, but it's not like you can just pick up your own saloon.
That's why across the West, you have these ghost towns. You have these areas where these towns are just completely abandoned and a new one springs up. So yeah, essentially you have a lot of businesses, Soto, that do basically break even. Because after they make a profit in one town, the miners end up moving and they've got to spend all the money they made on moving their own business. Right? But that was the life back in Boomtown West. Alright? Someone said protection. We talked about stable government. Well, at the time in these territories, these are still unorganized. They're not technically yet a part of the United States. They're not a state. So they don't have their own state government, which has its own police force, etc. You're relying on vigilante justice. Alright? But as mining grows, and as the Wild West starts to be tamed, you're soon replaced. Now towns nominate or elect a sheriff. And the sheriff is now, that's his full-time job. He's in charge of justice. All right, across the West, you had men like the Texas Rangers or the U.S. Marshals. All right, officially licensed lawmen, not just vigilantes who go out and bring their own form of justice.